Trouble in paradise for the Blackpool Combat Club, and MJF and the Firm reach an impasse on this, the final AEW Dynamite review. For now, at least. Hey everyone, Brian Zane here, and you heard me correctly. My review for this, the October 26th episode of Dynamite, is going to be my last one for the time being. I've decided to once again take a step back from reviewing these weekly shows. Nothing having to do with my feelings on AEW. I still really enjoy the product and all that, but at the end of the day, I just like having my weeknights back. And so I think going on this little break is going to be good for me. To be honest, I'm kind of liking this one video a week schedule I've gone back to, kind of harkening back to the old days of the channel. I think that, I've just learned over time that me trying to pump out as many videos as I can and this need to go, oh my God, I got to review this show and this show and this show, ultimately it doesn't really move the needle one way or the other on this channel for me. So I figured for now, I'm just going to experiment with this. The channel is always changing, always evolving in one way or another. And so, yeah, I'm taking a little break from weekly shows. I've been tinkering with the idea of maybe starting a secondary channel where I go back to reviewing current stuff and leaving this channel to focus more on historical things. I will come back here and drop some editorials, kind of like what I did with the CM Punk video last week, if the need arises, if the story is big enough. That's kind of what I'm thinking of going forward with this channel. And of course, I'll still be reviewing the current pay-per-views as they happen for both WWE and AEW. But for right now, I just like having my weeknights back. I like kind of having that freedom. So that's just the plan for right now. And I apologize to those who might be disappointed that you won't be hearing my takes on Dynamite for the time being. But like I said, I'm really enjoying, I enjoyed this week as well. And I wanted to mention more about last week's episode. I think if not for Hangman's untimely injury at the end of that main event, that episode would have been an all-timer given everything else happening on that show. So will this week's show, as we head toward Full Gear, how will this go? Will they treat me with a good send-off on my final Dynamite review for now at least? Let's find out. The show opens up with a match between the Jericho Appreciation Society and the Blackpool Combat Club as Chris Jericho and Daniel Garcia take on Claudio Castagnoli and Wheeler-Yuta. I just love the juxtaposition of the commentary team running down all the heinous stuff that Jericho's been doing the last couple of weeks. How he beat up Bobby Cruz and he threatened to beat up Ian Riccaboni and he pile drove Jerry Lynn, while all the arena, thousands of people, are gleefully singing Jericho's theme song like it's just the best thing in the world. It's a good match here, and really that's the story of the whole episode. I don't think there was one bad match on the card tonight. Claudio is beaten up on the outside during the break by Jake Hager. By the way, Hager rocking the purple bucket hat has got to be the most entertaining thing he's done in the last 10 years, in my opinion. Big hot tag sequence by Wheeler-Yuta here. He really shines on his birthday, and he does a big dive to the outside to cap everything off, diving on the other members of JAS. Jericho grabs his bat, but Claudio catches him, has a great combination where he's got Garcia on his shoulders and he's doing the giant swing to Chris Jericho at the same time. Just a phenomenal feat of strength here. Claudio hits the neutralizer on Jericho to win pretty decisively. No controversy, no screwy overbooked thing, just Claudio beating Jericho clean, kind of getting a win back after Jericho beat him for the ROH Championship. So I thought that was a really fun opening matchup here. Claudio is amazing to watch. Jake loves his hat. What more could you want? It's a Talking Smack reunion backstage as Renee Paquette interviews Bryan Danielson. I loved seeing this interaction here. Bryan talking about how frustrated he's been as of late with Chris Jericho and Garcia costing him the ROH title, and then the little tiff that he and Wheeler-Yuta had last week during their interview segment. And speaking of which, Yuta and Claudio make their way to the back. Yuta getting in Danielson's face. Claudio's got to break it up and saying, we are going to go to the back and we're going to talk about this like adults after Danielson's match. So yeah, tension in the Blackpool Combat Club. Say it isn't so. I think that this storyline here, how it's kind of transitioned from Danielson and Garcia to Danielson and Yuta, is very interesting. And I think Yuta and Garcia are kind of on that similar plane right now. They're kind of coming up together, parallel to each other in their respective stables. And so how's that relationship going to end up possibly costing the harmony of the BCC in the near future. We get a very interesting vignette here featuring the Elite, Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks. It's the first time they've really been mentioned or seen on AEW programming since the whole All Out debacle and their suspension. And this one is very peculiar because you see all this footage of them, and I mean, whoever did this promo does an amazing job with the graphics, because somebody, there's Thanos doing the snap, and all these shots of the Elite, they're just kind of dissolving into thin air as these shots are happening. You hear these sound bites from them, and they kind of like muffle and fade away as they're dissolving. And you see the AEW logo at the end, and the E fades away before the other two letters. Like, what does this all mean? Is this going to be some kind of like rebirth for the Elite when they come back from their suspension? I mean, I think maybe the worst case or the biggest case scenario would be an entire rebrand of the company, which I really doubt is going to happen. But it seems to be building to something having to do with the Elite here. And I'm really, really fascinated by this. It's the most intriguing thing I've seen in terms of like a build or kind of a mystery from AEW in a while. And yeah, the status of these guys is still technically unknown. I mean, I know there was a report that dropped earlier today as of this recording where, they might be doing some backstage stuff soon, but there's still no talk of whether they're going to be back on the air. And so who really knows for sure, but I think this is getting a lot of people talking. What do you think this Thanos vignette of the Elite dissolving into thin air has to do and what the payoff's going to be? By the way, there was a shot of Kenny Omega with the world title and Don Callis is next to him. I thought it would have been hilarious if Kenny dissolves, and for whatever reason, Don's just still there in the shot. Backstage, the Jericho Appreciation Society, you have a real hard time just hearing what the hell they're saying because there's a lot of like doubling up on the audio, and you're hearing the crowd chanting, what? Yeah, because there's a little bit you can parse from this. Jericho basically thinks that Claudio cheated to win, that's his claim, and then he issues an open challenge to any former Ring of Honor World Champion for next week on Dynamite. So, makes me wonder who that could possibly be. Is it going to be somebody who's not signed yet? I mean, Matt TAVEN just came into AEW, so maybe he'll challenge Chris Jericho next week. I mean, there's a lot of different options where they could go with this one. Either find somebody who's in-house, or maybe just kind of some, Hail Mary, some kind of real big surprise. I think there's a lot of different ways they could go with that, and we'll have to see where that goes. But speaking of championships, #1 contender match for the tag titles is happening next as FTR take on Swerve and Our Glory. The Guns are at ringside, sitting in the front row, mocking FTR like they've been doing for the last couple of weeks. The Acclaimed and Daddy Ass show up on stage with chairs to sit down and watch this match. And this is a great matchup here. I think it's my favorite one of the night. Cash taking a lot of the heat for FTR in this one. Good fight by him as he gets the hot tag to Dax. I love when he's kind of circling around trying to escape Swerve's clutches to get that hot tag in there. Great athleticism by Swerve and Lee. The second half of this match really picks up and goes to a whole new gear in my opinion. A lot of big reaction shots. Like, we keep cutting back to the Guns throughout this match, and like every couple of minutes we get a great reaction shot from Austin as this match goes on. Keith Lee kicks out of not only the Power and Glory finish, the superplex into a top rope splash combo, but also the big rig. But then after that happens, there's some confusion by the referee. Low blow to Dax. Cash is on the outside being held back by the Guns. That allows Swerve and Our Glory to win the match and once again become #1 contenders. We're going to get the third match in the series with them and the Acclaimed at some point. But yeah, this is a really good match. Clearly continuing the angle with FTR and the Guns. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some payoff to that at Full Gear to coincide with a tag title match then as well, for the AEW tag titles, I should say. But yeah, interesting kind of way they wove those two different tag team feuds together on this one. Renee Paquette backstage once again with Saraya. Another bit of reunion here from their past to the previous life, and so they're kind of chatting it up when Dr. Britt Baker comes in and starts shouting at Saraya. Saraya shouts back, and so then Renee kind of breaks it up, and it sounds like next week we're going to get some kind of sit-down interview or some kind of talky segment where Renee is going to moderate. And I wonder if we're going to get some maybe new development on just what Saraya will be doing in the near future in AEW. And then speaking of Renee, she's on stage with Maxwell Jacob Friedman. MJF is getting the hero's welcome here, and he's definitely leaning into the babyface role he's kind of falling into, even more so than he has the last several weeks. He's asked how he feels feels about wrestling Jon Moxley at Full Gear. He goes into this very good impression, kind of a bit exaggerated, but still very much on point impression of Jon Moxley. The gait, the things he says in the promos. It was a pretty good bit by MJF here. He also talks about the interaction he had with William Regal last week in regards to the brass knuckles and the Dynamite Diamond Ring. So he promises that at Full Gear, he will not use the Dynamite Diamond Ring. It's nice. He says, I'm not going to cheat this time, because he doesn't want to, he doesn't have to, he says. Stokely Hathaway shows up and he's like, hey, we're definitely going to beat up Moxley though later, right? But MJF swats the microphone out of Stokely's hands and he warns him that, not to touch Moxley. The firm cannot interfere with the business going into Full Gear, because if they do, MJF will fire Stokely. So Stokely leaves. He wraps it up with his super over catchphrase, and that's how it ends here. So yeah, I think it's, again, MJF very much leaning into it. We're going to talk more about this storyline at the end of the show, because it will circle back to that, and I'll have more thoughts about that once we get to it. There's a high package for the upcoming TNT title match on Friday between Wardlow and Matt Taven of the Kingdom. That was a big story that broke last week, was that Taven, Mike Bennett, and Maria Kanellis Bennett are all now signed to AEW. I'm extremely happy to hear that the Kingdom got signed. I love all three of those folks to death, even though I will maintain the fact that there's way too many people in the AEW roster, and they really have no business signing any more people at this point. But still, happy for Matt, Mike, and Maria. Then on we go to another match pitting the JAS versus the BCC as Sammy Guevara takes on Bryan Danielson. These two have some really good chemistry here early on. They work really well together, I think. Sammy doing his usual high-flying madness just before the commercial break, including a picture-perfect Asai moonsault with some incredible height there. Ty Mello getting her kicks in occasionally during the break. Sammy doing the big kicks to the chest only angers Danielson as he makes his big comeback. Guevara gets a little too flippy for his own good, and Danielson catches him in a label lock attempt. Guevara is able to get onto the ropes, and by the end, though, Danielson's just wrecking Guevara. There's the Busaiku knee, there's the stomps, there's the triangle choke, and Guevara just flattens out, and the referee calls it. Danielson wins here pretty emphatically at the end. I thought there was a very strong match for both guys here, and Sammy Guevara, say what you will about his attitude. I said a couple weeks ago that he should probably be fired, but as long as he keeps his nose clean, if he can keep this kind of stuff up in the ring, then I think he should stay. I'm very hot and cold on Sammy, just depending on what happens, but yeah, as long as he can keep his head down and not get himself into trouble, then yeah, I think he's a great asset to AEW. Renee Paquette's backstage once again with Alex Abrahantes and Rey Fenix. They both think that Penta El Zero Miedo is going to win the World Championship tonight, and they also say, hey, maybe Rey Fenix should challenge for the All-Atlantic Championship. But as soon as Abrahantes says that, in comes Christian Cage and Luchasaurus, and Cage says that Luchasaurus actually should be the next one in line for the championship. Then Orange Cassidy walks in, he brings out the All-Atlantic belt and says, hey, he'll take them both on, let's do this. So next week, we're going to have a triple threat, but right now, it's a commercial. Hey, look, I'm in a different part of the room now. Just want to take a little break and let y'all know that this week's Dynamite review is sponsored by ZBiotics. Now, if you drink alcohol, you've no doubt experienced the morning after. You know what I'm talking about. Hot coffee, cold showers, heavy breakfast, none of that helps stop it. You know what does help though? Preventing it from happening at the source the night before. That miserable feeling you get isn't caused by dehydration, but rather a toxic byproduct of the alcohol you drink, and that's where ZBiotics comes in. It contains an enzyme that breaks down that byproduct. I've tried this a few times myself, and I have to say, I'm a believer. All I gotta do is take one of these before my first drink, pace myself, and the next morning, I'm my usual bright, peppy self. This stuff is real science that works, and it comes with a 100% money-back guarantee. So what do you gotta lose? Get 15% off your first order by clicking the link below and using the code REGRET at checkout. Thanks so much, and now back to the Dynamite review. And we're back. Up next, Jamie Hayter wrestles Riho in singles action. Of course, Riho was the inaugural AEW Women's Champion. We haven't seen her wrestle on Dynamite in a very long time, but she did make the save for Toni Storm last week, and she recently wrestled Jungle Kiona on Dark this past week. And I'm really excited to actually, speaking of which, meet Jungle Kiona and see her wrestle in person for the first time. She's wrestling Deonna Purrazzo this Sunday night in Portland, Oregon, as part of Prestige Wrestling's Roseland 4. That's airing at 7 o'clock on IW TV if you're interested. I'll be helping to call the action alongside Jordan Castle if you want to check that out, but I've plugged too much already. It's a pretty darn good match. I think these two had styles that worked really well with each other. The fact that Rio is the smaller opponent and Jamie really kind of throwing her around, really showing her strength and asserting herself here in this match. That told a good story. Rio is able to stay in this thing though, despite some blatant interference by Britt Baker during this matchup. A nice counter into a code red at one point, but Jamie kicks out, recovers, and Jamie hits a big ripcord lariat to win the match pretty emphatically here. But despite that, still a good showing, still a good return match for Rio here. Jamie still kind of building her stock for what inevitably happens between her and Britt Baker down the line. Then we see Toni Storm, the interim world champ, showing up on stage, posing with the belt toward Hayter after that's over with. So yeah, overall pretty good match, and yeah, good to see Rio back in action. Eddie Kingston interviewed backstage by Renee Paquette, and she asks what happened this past Friday on Rampage when his friends were trying to talk to him. Basically, through gritted teeth, he smiles and says everything's fine, everything's okay. He talks about the main event match happening tonight where he says, hey, Penta is tough, but he believes Moxley is going to win, and then he tells everyone to leave him alone. And then we go to a Darby Allin vignette where he explains where Sting has been for the last several weeks. Basically, he says there was a conversation they had where he wants to prove himself by being by himself, and that's why Sting has kind of gone away for the time being. Talks about his upcoming match with Jay Lethal, where he says they say they've got a friend who knows Darby's weaknesses, but Darby admits that his biggest weakness is himself, and he's going to, basically prove himself in this matchup here. And then Lethal and Sanjay Dutt have a rebuttal. Basically, they're going to beat him up. In your main event for the AEW World Championship, Jon Moxley defends against 1/3 of the Trios champions in Penta El Zero Miedo, who, by the way, came out with some pretty cool entrance attire for this show. Lots of fighting on the outside for the first portion of this match for sure. Moxley is driven into the steps repeatedly at one point. He does come back though, hits a big pile driver in the ring on Penta. Moxley blocking a destroyer attempt off those steel steps from earlier, drops him with a DDT. There's a fear factor by Penta and there's a kick out. Moxley hits a couple of Death Riders in the end though to win the match and retain the championship. It was a very physical match, very entertaining matchup, and I can't believe these two had never wrestled each other beforehand, I'm pretty sure, but yeah, these two worked great together, and Penta's one of those guys where you can kind of slot him in that main event spot on short notice, and even though he's been doing mostly tag stuff for his entire run in AEW, he's still enough of a singles threat, and he's still so compelling and fun to watch that I think that it just made it for a very entertaining main event. After the match though, W. Morrissey and the rest of the firm beat up Moxley. Stokely Hathaway then enters the ring and joins in. MJF shows up. He looks muy conflicted. Should he go breaking the fight up or not? He leaves at first, then he comes running back down to the ring. He tells everyone to back off. He fires Stokely on the spot in the ring, and that makes the firm beat him up. Now MJF's getting beat up by the same guys he had on retainer to help get him that poker chip back at All Out. It ends with Morrissey choke slamming him to the timekeeper's table, and that's how the show wraps up as we go off the air. So, is MJF turning face officially for good? Absolutely not. This to me feels like much like a red herring. I don't know if MJF's really going to keep the firm, but either way, this is not a full-blown face turn for MJF, because we've seen this before. Like it happened with The Rock. He was face for a little bit before Survivor Series '98. Bully Ray got beat up by Aces and Eights before he revealed he was the leader of Aces and Eights. So there's a precedent to this, is what I'm saying. And so last week in my Punk video, I had my theory of what's going to happen, and this show, not just the Blackpool Combat Club stuff, but also with this ending moment here, this only solidifies my theory that MJF is not only going to turn back to being a mega heel, but somebody, William Regal, is going to help him get there. So my grade for this week's Dynamite is a B+. Another very strong showing for Dynamite here. I don't think there was a bad match on this card. I mean, none of them were truly like all-timers to stand the test of time, but I mean, every match delivered, and I was really entertained by all of them. Also, some really interesting plot points here they're kind of building off of with the Blackpool Combat Club, with MJF, with whatever they're doing with the Elite. Who really knows for sure on that one especially, but there's a lot of intrigue there at all these different points, and I like that there are those different things. It really it makes you want to keep watching what's going to happen next week. So color me intrigued, color me interested, because I think this week's episode did a pretty good job really laying the groundwork for what we're going to see in the next few weeks. But what did you think of Dynamite this week, folks? where do you think these plot points will take us as we head to Full Gear? I want to hear about it in the comment section below. And of course, don't forget my Hell Comes to Frogtown review came out on Wednesday, so do check that out if you haven't yet. Thank you so much for your support of the Dynamite review and of course all the videos that go out on this channel. I really appreciate that. So don't fret about this Dynamite review going away. It will come back at some point in the future, I'm sure of it. But until then, folks, I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.